George, ready? When it's ready?
Ready?
I think we're good. If everyone is ready, time will begin. Now, Georgia Tech affirms the resolution. First, on framework. The framework is to evaluate this round through mitigating structural violence. Accounting for structural barriers is a prerequisite to any other moral calculus. Winter and Layton argue that structural violence makes the oppressed invisible to the rest of society, so that our understanding of society is always incomplete. Apatow explains that structural violence is rooted in moral exclusion, which is fundamentally flawed because of its reliance on perceived differences. Mills explains that any framework that does not explicitly address these exclusions is a continuation of a violent and harmful legacy. Ultimately, many cements this idea that you cannot found a moral or a legislative order on structural violence or racism. With all this being said, we believe that the best way to address rising inequality and racism is to implement a universal basic income of $1,000 a month, which would be overseen by an independent body to adjust the UBI tied to cost of living and inflation metrics. That being said, the first contention is racism and inequality. Inequality in the US continues to grow as Zuckerman finds that the top 1% own about 40% of total wealth and hold 40 times the wealth of the average American family. These causes are structural. Standing explains that the increasing shares of income are captured by those who control assets, while wages for most people have stagnated over the past few years. Cohen warns that currently rising inequality increases the risk of the recession, causing a cycle of violence. These trends also affect different groups unevenly. Brody finds that black workers are overrepresented in 17 of the 30-year occupations most at risk of automation, while Hispanic workers are overrepresented in 22 out of the 30, meaning that technological change is more likely to displace these groups. Brown explains that black households receive only about 30 cents for every dollar of new wealth, and projections show that new wealth for AI could increase the racial gap by about $43 billion each year. And these problems are not solved by welfare. As Carden explains that U.S. welfare policies from their inception have always been discriminatory. Pitchy cites that 63% of Americans are unable to handle a $500 car payment or even a $1,000 emergency bill in the status quo in the welfare world. A universal basic income changes these dynamics in several ways. First, it addresses wage stagnation. Hughes explains that even as the economy has grown, wages for most Americans have remained flat for decades. Porges argues that UBI would increase workers' bargaining power, forcing employers to raise wages. Schiller adds that with the UBI, workers gain representation and self-determination to improve conditions. Howard concludes that a UBI will enable people to let their intrinsic life aspirations to flourish and lead to better individual well-being. UBI encourages entrepreneurship. Cypher explains that a UBI eliminates the fear of failure and gives people the power to work on new ideas as well as take risks. This is why Santens finds that there was a 35% increase in entrepreneurship in Namibia and India due to a UBI when this was tested. This is essential to reducing inequality, as Yang finds that these increases in jobs, wages, and education at a community level are very good for the community. Smith confirms that small businesses are a pillar of a healthy economy and help to distribute the capital income broadly across all citizens rather than keeping it with just the wealthy. Next, it allows people to invest in their future. Ruckert et al. Find that UBI improves school enrollment, increases graduation rates, and leads to better long-term outcomes in both income and health, as people have the emergency fund preventing this cycle of violence. Cypher finds that this allows more people, especially from marginalized communities, to take risks and start new ventures. Santens also finds that this increases entrepreneurship and innovation. Research by Hoynes et al. Shows that a 1 percentage point increase in unemployment raises poverty by about 4.4 to 0.7 percentage points, while a 10% increase in median wages reduces poverty by around 2 percentage points. Santens empirically proves that these systems, like the Alaska dividend, lead to lower rates of poverty. Next is political participation. Inequality also affects political participation. DeSilver finds that only about 55.7% of the voting age population voted in the 2016 election, placing the United States 26th out of 32 developed countries in the entire world. McLevy explains that lower income individuals are less likely to vote, which leads to policies that favor wealthier groups. UBI empirically has improved voter turnout, as shown in Alaska. According to Lofer, the Alaskan UBI had a significant positive impact for over 20 years on voter turnout in general elections. Simonova et al. Find that the individuals who grow up with higher income are 10 to 20 percentage points more likely to vote as adults, and this leads to more representation in policies, which leads to better policies for these underrepresented populations. Next is gender inequality. Financial dependence is a key reason why people remain in abusive relationships. The National Network to End Domestic Violence finds that financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. And survivors often stay or return because they lack financial stability. UBI changes this. Hughes explains that when individuals are no longer economically dependent on a partner, they're less likely to tolerate coercion, abuse, or violence just to maintain basic security. This is supported empirically. Ancelotti finds that UBI reduces both sexual and physical violence by giving individuals the ability to reduce abuse or resist abuse or leave, with effects that extend across entire communities. UBI could give millions of people in abusive relationships freedom. Overall, there's a few key impacts. First is that inequality has severe consequences for the United States in general. Sangano finds that reducing inequality increases economic growth, and Roddick finds that a 10% income increase reduces poverty by 20 to 30%. Yet, without that action, Bacalar reports that poverty and inequality already contribute to over 133,000 deaths per year in the US alone. Inequality also destabilizes democracy. Macrodis finds that a 1 percentage rise in inequality increases political polarization by 0.18 to 0.22 percentage points. And Binder finds that 75% of major policy issues are blocked by legislative gridlock, preventing effective responses to issues like racism and inequality, as Blankenhart notes. The effects extend to health and economy. Pressman links inequality to worse health outcomes, with Powell finding that these effects are especially severe for marginalized communities. For these reasons, we affirm UBI just as MLK did and would have wanted. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. And I'll start the timer. Okay, so thank you for your speech. So you argue that the framework we should utilize is mitigating structural violence because the oppressed is invisible to the rest of society. But if we're giving a blanket $1,000 check to everyone, we're pumping everyone the same amount, we're giving everyone the same handicap, how does it actually stand up for the people that are oppressed rather than actually concentrating efforts to give them to them directly?
I would say that the efforts to give it to them directly are not working in the status quo. If they were, inequality and poverty wouldn't be on the rise as they are right now. And insofar as the current programs are not working, obviously we have to implement a new program. And out of those new programs, UBI is probably the best one to implement.
So why is UBI, if this is the framework we're utilizing, why are we not targeting those resources? So reforming welfare to target those exact people rather than giving everyone the same exact amount of money?
I would say that in the status quo, we already do that. It's called having a bureaucratic government that we currently have right now. And then also to kind of add on top of that, UBI signals equality to everyone since everyone kind of gets the same amount of pay and gets the same amount of monthly paychecks.
I appreciate it. So you want to implement UBI so what's the model you would be utilizing? How much money per month would you want to give to the American public?
Living amount, which we said would be categorized at around $1,000. $1,000
a month. Okay, so $1,000 a month,
which would be adjusted for inflation and for other
factors. Yes, $1,000 a month, and after running the math, that would be about $4 trillion under the number of U.S. citizens. $1,000 a month, 12 months per year, right? 11% of the entire U.S. nominal GDP, according to 2026 estimates. How would you plan to pay for that?
Well, I would tell you, one, the cost wouldn't actually be $4 trillion because not every single person would get a UBI. Rather,
I'm going to stop you there. So not every single person would receive a UBI, but under your own definition of UBI, everyone is receiving a blanket amount of money from the government. Can you please explain how under a UBI, not every citizen is receiving money from the government?
No, that's not our definition of a UBI, right? We say it's a basic income that will be given to marginalized communities. We don't say that it's a blanket check to just write to every single American out of the 300 million. We say first it should be given to marginalized communities.
Can you provide me a source that defines UBI as not a system that gives money to not every citizen of a community?
I think that it's just a better argument that my partner will probably respond to.
Sorry, say that again?
I'm saying it's a better argument that my partner will respond to throughout his rebuttal.
It's a better argument that your partner, so you're giving your partner that question. Okay, we'll remember to ask that in the future. So, will this be mutually exclusive to welfare, or will this replace welfare?
I would say that it's going to be mutually exclusive.
Okay, so it's mutually exclusive. Okay, so then you say that these programs should be targeted at marginalized communities specifically, but then you want to, we're taking this away from welfare. So we're taking the budget from welfare and putting it into, so we're taking the budget away from the 99 million that receive welfare and putting it into the hands of the 350 million Americans that live in the US, right? So how is that mitigating structural violence if we're taking money away from the oppressed and giving it to everyone?
Well, I just said that first of all, it's mutually, we would have both. And then I would say second, the thing is that
Can I stop you there for a second? So you said mutually exclusive, but you plan to have both. Typically, mutual exclusion means that you can only have one or the other. Can you please elaborate on that?
yeah, that's my bad. I think I kind of like misunderstood what mutually exclusive meant in the scenario, but I thought mutually inclusive. I would say that welfare and UBI would be existing insofar as there's going to be other funding mechanisms to fund a UBI rather than taking.
Would you
just taking
elaborate on what those specific funding mechanisms are? Because currently, this seems like a utopian policy proposal that has no way to provide the funding for it. Okay, that's 4 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Are you ready? Yes.
Quite.
Good afternoon, honorable judges, opponents, and audience. There is a famous saying that goes, the American dream is not a sprint, it's a marathon that rewards determination and resilience. These words capture the heart of what has always made our nation extraordinary, the American dream, which is about the dignity of labor. Work isn't just a job, it's the forge where character is built, where sacrifice breeds strength, and where resilience turns dreams into legacies. Yet, UBI threatens to unravel this timeless ideal. UBI severs the vital link between effort and reward, tempting us to trade determination for dependency, and the American dream fades into a shadow of complacency. Therefore, as a first negative speaker, I stand to negate the resolution, and I will present 4 key arguments to support this. Argument 1. UBI is financially unfeasible, risking economic strain. In the marathon of progress, true victory comes from unity and wise stewardship, not divisive dreams that drain our shared strength. UBI demands trillions in funding, estimated at 3 to 4 trillion annually for the US alone, requiring massive tax hikes on AI firms that could stifle innovation. Reasons include fiscal reality. Progressive taxes like a 10% VAT would raise consumer prices by 5 to 8% per economic models, while political fragility stems from perceptions of free money, fueling resentment among taxpayers and consumers. Furthermore, universality is incredibly inefficient. UBI sends unconditional cash to millions of wealthy Americans who experience zero marginal benefit from the payout. Instead of diluting our resources across the entire population, we must concentrate that funding into targeted programs for the marginalized communities who actually need it. Argument 2. UBI fails to address root causes of AI displacement, ignoring adaptation and innovation. True resilience emerges from when we tackle challenges directly and adapt courageously. UBI addresses income loss but neglects underlying issues like skill gaps and market mismatches in the face of AI automation. It's a passive handout that doesn't incentivize the upskilling needed for AI-created roles, leading to long-term dependency instead of empowerment, which is what the American dream is about. Evidence from MIT economists highlight that while automation displaces jobs, it also creates opportunities for reskilling, with UBI potentially reducing adaptation rates by 15%. Argument 3. UBI discourages work and economic productivity, leading to stagnation in an AI economy. Imagine a future where AI unlocks endless possibilities, but we squander it by dimming the fire of human ambition. UBI's unconditional cash payments can lead to a welfare trap, diminishing incentives for employment and innovation. This may result in a K-shaped recovery, where the unskilled lag behind, exacerbating the challenges of job displacement by AI, according to an article by LinkedIn. Because UBI doesn't save the economy, it actively triggers a recession, according to the 2026 World Bank study of Iran, which proved that unconditional cash subsidies created labor force participation by 7% and slow GDP growth by 2%. And I would like to propose superior alternatives like enhancing social welfares, retraining programs, and wage subsidies, because evidence shows these alternatives work. According to the 2023 and 2026 UK pilot, it increased productivity by 15% and enhanced welfare, like the 2024 expanded unemployment insurance, which supported 2 million AI displaced workers, boosting employment by 25%. Finally, I would like to do some rebuttal to the contentions or the arguments made by the affirmative. First, on framework. The affirmative claims moral exclusion is flawed, and UBI is the best way to address structural barriers like racism amid AI automation. But this is red herring. UBI's universality doesn't target barriers. It blankets everyone, including the wealthy, wasting trillions, as we argued in argument 2. Their vague moral exclusion ignores fiscal reality. As I already stated, 3 to 4 trillion US cost risks and inflation and tax hikes that hurt the marginalized groups. On racism and inequality, they highlight Hispanic and Black workers' overrepresentation in automatable jobs, claiming UBI counters discriminatory welfare and boosts bargaining power. This is false. US welfare issues stem from conditionality, but UBI's unconditionality creates a welfare trap, reducing labor participation by 7%, according to the Iran study made by the World Bank study. Next, political participation. They argue inequality lowers voter turnout, citing Alaska as proof UBI increases it for better representation. But Alaska's dividend isn't full UBI, it's oil-funded and limited. Lower income voting drops due to systemic issues, not just cash. UBI could reduce participation by fostering complacency, as MIT economists note 15% lower adaptation rates. Finally, gender inequality. They claim UBI lets survivors escape domestic violence by ending dependency. Tragic. But UBI is a band-aid, according to Stockton's 2019 to 2021 pilot, which saw only 10% pursue skills, potentially trapping people in passivity. It doesn't redesign violence. It enhances welfare in an expanded unemployment insurance program of workers, including women, with counseling add-ons, which UBI in the end will divert funds from these targeted aids into more domestic violence. Thank you. And I'm ready for prospects.
Okay. Are you good for prospects? Okay. I mean, I guess then starting now. Kind of a quick clarifying question, I would say more so. How does a UBI create a welfare job?
Because if you give cash or free money to people, they would have this free money to spend instead of working and incentivizing work, in which in turn, that welfare will be a trap because they will be stuck in this cycle of instead of looking for jobs and looking for new ways of improving themselves in the American dream, they will be stuck in this situation of just getting free money and not improving their lives.
So are you saying that, like, with a UBI, people will just not want to work at all?
Can you repeat?
I'm asking, are you saying that with a UBI that people will just not want to work at all?
Yes, because it's free money and they will just have this complacency of not working because they already have the money. And then what will be the point? And in consequence, I would say if they start looking for jobs in the short term, it might work. But what happens in the long term to their families, for example? Would they rely on that UBI for survival in the US?
Okay, I see. I would say that. I mean, since it's my prospects, I would say that, like, I'll move on to the next question. But it's a good, like, I just wanted to clarify because of my partner's rebuttal. But on your responses to my case, so starting off at the very top about UBI not being the best way to be able to target racism, insofar as in the status quo that Black households are only able to receive 38 cents for every dollar that every other race would be able to get of new wealth, how does giving everyone nothing in your world fix that disparity?
We're not saying we're giving nothing. What we're saying is that we'll enhance social services and we'll provide retraining skills and also subsidies.
But how can a person retrain if they don't have the money?
That's why we will provide that, as well as enhancing social services.
The entire point of the negative is to not be providing a UBI. Without a UBI, how does a person have the money to be able to retrain, specifically a person in a Black household that's getting 38 cents on every dollar?
I understand that you could use UBI to invest on the reprogramming, but then what will you have left? How will you live? What's the point of UBI? I guess I thought UBI was to spending food or your rent. Are you going to invest in reprogramming or retrain yourself, or in buying food for your family? We will not have.
Well, in your world, how are you achieving this?
Huh?
My question is, how in your world is a person from a Black household supposed to move up, say, like in economic terms or in social terms? If they're receiving 38 cents on every dollar, are they just supposed to stay on the 38 cents on every dollar?
In my world, not just in UBI.
Okay. I guess I'll move on to the next question then. So, I would say that, insofar as, insofar on this whole funding mechanism argument, right? That a UBI would cost about $3 to $4 trillion per year. Are you accounting for any of the AI funding, AI specific funding mechanisms, maybe data center taxes, AI VAT taxes, or land value taxes in that number, or is that only through income tax?
So yeah, UBI demands trillions in funding, estimated at 3-4 trillion annually for the US alone. Yeah, so that would count also the taxes, the income taxes as well.
No, I'm saying, are you? Because I also I have that evidence on the neg as well. I'm asking, is that evidence accounting for only income tax, or is that accounting for also AI specific taxes such as data center taxes, AI VAT taxes? Okay, AI VAT taxes or land value taxes. But yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's go for it.
So I'm gonna give you. Okay, I'm just gonna go off on our case, and then I'll go on. Or I'll start on their case, and then our case. Yeah. Okay. Oh wait, get that timer here. Yeah, thank you. Okay. When it's ready, judge ready. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's start on their main hypothesis that the American dream is a marathon. The American dream just doesn't exist anymore. It's just incredibly hard to escape cyclical poverty. And so a UBI is the only way out of this, right? A UBI is the main way that we can drive up growth and we can actually allow people to escape and start their own businesses, start innovations, do the actual American dream. That's what we say in our case. But then their main argument throughout the entire case is that UBI will increase complacency, reduce ambition. That's like saying giving food and money and the ability to choose your work is going to increase complacency and make people lazy. I like to believe that the nature of human being is not to be lazy and to create real value. And also, you're just saying that giving people food and shelter and the ability to feed themselves is going to reduce productivity. I think that's a really sad argument to make. Then on the argument one, which is funding, so two things. One, it's not going to cost, we're going to fund it through taxes. I'll tell you exactly which taxes. But two, UBI is not going to cost that much. Builder 17 says that automation will double GDP by 2030 anyway. You can see what's happening with AI here. You can see that there's a significant portion of economic growth that's been fueled by AI, whereas the rest of the economy is actually lagging behind. People are losing their jobs. And so GDP has been decoupled from actual job growth and productivity. At this point, it doesn't really matter. So the main issue here is we need to solve we need to fix the idea that productivity is connected to the GDP, right? And so just by giving $1,000 a year, that would increase economic growth by 12.56%. Each $1,000, that's from Zeza, the Roosevelt Institute. And so we actually get more back from whatever we spend. The idea of a UBI being expensive is not really it. And that's why Santence concludes that a UBI would cost about 30%, say less than $1 trillion of what the actual cost of a UBI would be because of the increased economic growth. But then I propose 3 funding mechanisms for a UBI. The first is a VAT tax. They say that VAT tax is bad. I argue that no, a VAT tax will allow, most European countries have a VAT tax. It's been empirically proven, and VAT taxes are pretty useful at getting money from the value-added products of a business. So that's why it actually simulates consumption. So Gratz finds of Columbia finds that shifting taxes from production to consumption stimulates jobs and investments and induces companies to base headquarters in the U.S. or rather than abroad. And that's why VAT taxes actually increase on net GDP by 5%. But then also we say that you can just fund it through AI taxes. You can fund it through a land value tax. There's significant ways that you can fund a UBI that they don't really discuss. I think that, and those taxes would actually do benefit. They would redistribute wealth from the upper rungs of society back into the lower rungs, which gets into their second argument that millions of wealthy people get UBI. That's completely fine because they're going to be putting in more money into the UBI than they're actually getting out of it. Allowing everybody to get UBI basically eliminates the bureaucratic cost of like singling out people and means testing them. It also removes the structural stigma, it removes the stigma of receiving welfare. The issue with current welfare payments is that there is a social stigma associated with receiving them, which prevents people that get welfare from ever being truly equal members in society. That's the ability of our argument. But then on their second argument and third argument, the main reason they say that reskilling rates would decrease by 15%. I think this is logically inaccurate. They don't really provide a good source for this. And if you see most of the UBI like pilot studies, you see that there's poverty decreases and people tend to produce more businesses. In Sam Altman's UBI studies, there was a 24% increase in India, Nigeria, and Kenya. There were similar increases in entrepreneurship and jobs. People tend to use their free time in productive ways. So I don't really understand this ambition argument. The fact that people are working less is because they're able to negotiate new wages. They're able to save money, and they're able to put those skills towards better uses. So working less is not a bad thing. They just work 2 jobs instead of 3. Like this is not like the whole productivity argument just doesn't make any sense to me. And then they say that other alternatives are better. There's no reason why we can't do other alternatives while also doing a UBI. We can definitely provide job training. They don't tell us how much it's going to cost. We can definitely provide job training while doing UBI. It's not infeasible, and many people can pay for the job training with their UBI. Okay. Then onto their case, they say our case. They say a couple things. They say UBI is not targeted and it causes a welfare trap. The reason a welfare trap is called a welfare trap is because welfare is what causes a welfare trap. Means-tested welfare is the worst way to give out money because the second you escape the trap, you lose all of your benefits. So you could be making $32,000 in welfare benefits, and the second you get a job, you could only be making $24,000. And then, so why would you ever lose your job? Why would you ever lose those welfare payments? So no, a UBI actually defeats the exact purpose of a welfare trap. They say so. Unconditionality is the best thing of a UBI. It solves for the very issue of welfare, which is social stigma. If we want to solve inequality, we need to give everybody the same starting ground, and that gives everybody that makes everyone put on an equal playing field. And that perception is also very important to solve inequality. At the end of the day, most of the responses on the rest of our case are just saying that UBI causes complacency, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. People working less is because they can afford to work less because they actually have they have a social safety net. Okay, that's time.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Ready? Yeah, right there.
So you say you want to utilize VAT tax because Europe has it and it works.
Mhm.
But don't we also have other taxes to supplement our system that Europe doesn't have? So how are we just going to add a new tax on consumers and not expect prices to drive up?
We don't have to use a VAT
Significantly,
tax.
just
Provide
starting
examples.
Yeah, let me finish.
Okay.
Okay, so how are we just going to add a new tax on consumers and not expect prices to drive up significantly, just as Trump's tariffs did?
Okay, sure. Okay, so I guess I'll explain this in 2 ways, right? First of all, we don't have to do a VAT tax. We can do a land value tax. I think the land value tax is actually honestly better because it increases the housing supply and that drives down prices. That drives down housing prices. We can implement taxes in such a way that it can drive down. Like for example, land value tax taxes the value of unused land, and so because of that, people won't hold on to land because of speculation. They'll actually build more residential properties, and so that will create net good because people will build on the properties. There'll be more housing. Housing prices will go down.
Gotcha.
We
Thank
can
you.
reduce the cost for consumers.
Gotcha. Thank you. You reject complacency, saying human value isn't laziness, but yet how do you reconcile this with the evidence I provided from Finland's 2025 KILA report of 10% work hour reductions under
That's
UBI?
fine with me. Okay, there's two things. One, productivity is decoupled from economic growth now. So because of AI, productivity doesn't really. So prove to me that productivity is related to economic growth within an AI era in the long term. I say it doesn't. The second thing is the reason that people work less is because they have the ability to work less. I think it's a good thing that people are working less if they have a UBI. They don't have to work so much to support their families because they have these payments to cover essential food and necessities. That's the whole point of a UBI.
Okay, you propose also AI taxes to fund UBI. How do you prevent these taxes from stifling in AI innovation?
Stifling AI innovation? Why? Okay, so two things. Prove to me that AI innovation is good for society. Because right now it's just taking everyone's jobs. So you have a lot of ground to cover saying that AI innovation is good for society. And two, why would AI innovation not continue if we put a tax on it? Most AI billionaires are also advocating for taxes on AI because they know that AI innovation is going to continue anyway.
Thank you. Also, you were asking for other alternatives, why they cannot coexist, why not UBI and other alternatives proposed cannot coexist, but if they can coexist, explain how to fund UBI's 3-4 trillion annual cost.
I already explained it. We'd use land value taxes can already raise about $1 trillion or $2 trillion
without massive tax hikes or inflation.
I don't need to. I want tax hikes. I say land value taxes are good for society.
Okay.
Oh, is it not done?
I think there's a minute left.
There's
Yeah.
a note.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was just asking.
No.
you
I
something.
was just.
Yeah.
I didn't hit the button.
Go for it.
Where were we?
Without
Okay,
massive
sorry,
tax hikes.
Yeah, so we're saying without the massive tax hike, you answered that.
Yeah.
Doesn't UBI's unconditional cash undermine alternatives like wage subsidies by diminishing work incentives?
What? Okay, like I said, even under your best evidence, you say that work reduction happens by like 10%. That's just people using their extra hours to do something better, like take care of their kids. Like this is not, that 10% reduction in work hours is not bad. Like your worst impact of a UBI is like 5 to 10% reduction in work hours where people can do actually like necessary things in their life.
So then give me, you say they could coexist then, but name a real world trial where UBI was implemented alongside reskilling programs, for example, and outcomes improved over alternatives.
With what?
So name a real world trial where UBI was implemented alongside reskilling programs and
What?
Reskilling.
Oh, reskilling.
Yes, and outcomes improved.
Well, okay, that's time, but there's no program. I can't cite you a study if that study doesn't exist.
Okay. Thank you.
Ready for the set to UNC? Okay, amazing. And starting the time now. Judges, opponents, and members of the audience, the affirmative team has presented you with a progressive utopian idea that sounds fantastic in theory. Let's give everyone a ton of money and then have no really way to pay for it. But in practice, their case is riddled with deep contradictions, shifting goalposts, and a fundamental misunderstanding of economics. First, let's dive into the negative offense, which must address the glaring inconsistencies with the affirmative has presented today. First, they claim that universal basic income will not go to every citizen. Let's be perfectly clear, under the modern definition of every accepted definition of UBI, it is distributed under universal to every single citizen. If means tested it is restricted, this is no longer a UBI. It is simply a targeted welfare program, which proves the negative side of this debate because they have stated that welfare and means tested programs are broken. Furthermore, listening to their shifting narrative on the existing safety net, they claim that UBI would not replace welfare. The immediate moment they realized that the economic math did not support their argument, they pivoted claiming that UBI will actually be in addition to welfare. They cannot have it both ways just because it does not support their argument and it's not convenient for them. If a UBI is stacked on top of our current welfare programs, then the government spending that required to sustain these programs skyrockets astronomically to impossible levels, guaranteeing inflation right here and there. Finally, the affirmative attempts to use structural violence as their framework to justify this plan. But if flat UBI is a terrible plan for addressing structural violence, it inherently recognizes that different marginalized groups face unique, disproportionate barriers, but we're treating everyone the same and giving them the same amount of money. And so you have a struggling single mother and a Wall Street billionaire, and they are receiving the exact kind of support and inherently replacing welfare with that plan. So here we will also provide a few other counter arguments, and then we have a mutually exclusive counter plan that actually addresses the root of the problem, of which they have not done. So first, this UBI is a terrible solution for job displacement because there is zero link that they have shared of how handing out unconditional checks will get people back into the workforce. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, in 2023, they have shown that an unconditional $1,000 monthly UBI caused a 4.1 percentage point drop in overall labor market participation. Even worse, every single dollar that the government handed out, actual income dropped by 28 cents on the dollar because they slashed their work hours. Therefore, UBI does not solve displacement, it simply permanently subsidizes their unemployment. Next, if we look at when the affirmative realizes that the AI bubble and other tax structures in place will not pay for these bills, they begin playing a shell game with the American economy. First, they float the idea of a value-added tax, but then as soon as we begin to challenge that, they immediately move on to a land value-added tax. Let's look at what a value-added tax is. It is a regressive consumption tax. It is in the same method of Trump's tariffs. It places taxes on the American consumer. So then as soon as we challenge that, we shift to a land value tax. And then they directly shared that it will generate $1 to $2 trillion for America. But if this were really that profitable, why have we not implemented this already? Does any tax even generate 3% of the entire American nominal GDP? No, there's simply not a tax that does that. So what happens when we actually point out these trillion-dollar funding mechanisms? Next, you have another contention of ours is that this will cause hyperinflation because corporate tax that pays for the programs that they want implemented simply does not sustain itself in America's modern day economy. Giving everyone in America a monthly check is the same macroeconomic concept as printing money. Economists know that universal cash triggers catastrophic demand inflation, just as Biden-Trump stimulus checks did, and we are facing the repercussions of that inflation right now. If every consumer suddenly has an extra $1,000 in their pocket, the corporate landlords and monopolies that the affirmative claims to hate immediately will raise rent and grocery prices by $1,000, neutralizing the check and shifting all profits back into the producers as a cycle. The resulting injection of $1 trillion is the exact reason that we are suffering from inflation today, as everyday people are continually priced out of the market. For that reason, UBI is a parasite in the symbiotic relationship for this economy. Now, as they have shared before, because a UBI nationally costs $3 to $4 trillion annually under their model of $1,000 per month, it is mathematically impossible to fund this without cannibalizing the existing state of welfare. So here, mathematically, they're taking money away from the bottom 99 million Americans who relied on targeted welfare benefits for survival and are redistributing it to the upper 250 million American who will only experience a diminished marginalized return on that extra $1,000 per month, taking away targeted Medicaid, disability, and SNAP benefits away from vulnerable communities, and so the government can mail a check to every millionaire in America. This is upward redistribution of wealth and frankly, very adverse to the communities they claim to stand up for under the framework of structural violence. Now, the negative counterplan is direct targeted spending. And the reason we say this, never in history, other than in the COVID-19 pandemic, which was declared a national emergency, has the government ever handed out cash checks to people as a result to solve our economic problems. Every single time in history, we use targeted direct spending at the problem rather than giving it as spreading it evenly to solve that issue. According to the Center of Budget and Policy Priorities, targeted welfare expansions are the single most effective way to reduce poverty without triggering macroeconomic inflation. By targeting the spending, we protect the bottom 99 million Americans without needlessly handing cash to the 250 million who don't need it. We have proven that we must level the playing field instead of providing a handicap to everyone on that exact same ladder. A UBI will not result in higher employment. It will lead to abysmal economic results, runaway inflation as it has in the past, and a destruction of the very safety net that Americans rely on. Vote for the negative counterplan to mandate direct targeted spending on the communities that need it the most. For those reasons, I urge you to vote for the negative. Thank you, and I stand for cross.
I do the cross, right? Yeah. Okay. So start the timer. Okay. So how does hyperinflation happen? Like, what is the mechanism behind inflation?
Well, one way is printing money.
Okay.
Is
So
another.
if we don't print money, will there be inflation?
Yeah, there's other ways to cause inflation. That's
Okay.
one way.
Okay. So what is the other way to cause inflation?
When you mess with, when you take the free market, you mess with the supply, you mess with the demand. That will cause.
Okay, but does that
inflation.
not stabilize over the long term? Like, whenever you increase, so if that was the case, like the second you have massive like you have like any sort of economic growth, you have inflation. So just never have economic growth at that point, right?
Well, no, economic growth needs to be on both sides.
Yes. So if you have more, if people are willing to, so answer this question. So if people are willing to they have more money to spend, will companies not produce more output so that they can spend that money, right? Like, does supply not rise to meet demand? Is what I'm basically asking.
How are we rising that supply? In fact, if anything, we are taking people out of the market by rising inflation.
Wait, that doesn't make. Okay, wait.
If more
That doesn't
people are
answer the
able-
question. Wait.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
can supply rise to meet demand? If there is an increase in demand, will supply rise to meet it?
If everyone has an extra $1,000
Yeah.
from the government, then we can agree that the demand shifts up, right?
Yes, and so
then
supply will
if
shift
the-
up to meet
what,
it.
what happens when demand increases?
Mhm.
Everything becomes more expensive.
For the short term, I'm saying over the long term. Okay, that's not even a question at that point. Okay. So then I want to go to your so you told me that we're gonna take out welfare. What what's the link there?
I asked you guys, are we gonna take out welfare? And
We said that was a misspeak, right?
okay,
We're
so
not
you
gonna
guys, you want to keep welfare.
Yes.
Well, that costs about $8 trillion. Welfare spending is $3.8 trillion, and then
welfare
UBI,
spending is not 3.8 trillion. So I mean, in the U.S. or where are we talking?
US.
In the U.S., in the U.S. the welfare spending is 1.5 trillion. A lot less.
Are you adding Medicare and Medicaid?
Yeah, that's all welfare spending. Okay, we will go into that later. Let's see here. Okay. So, so how does this is what I wanted to talk about. So how does directed welfare spending eliminate the? I guess the big issue is that how does directed welfare spending eliminate the stigma associated with receiving welfare, or does it at all?
How does targeted welfare spending help the stigma?
Yes, the associated stigma of receiving welfare benefits in the first place from the government.
The benefit of receiving welfare is that it's supposed to be for the marginalized communities, right?
Okay, so
It's
see how you're saying that benefits have to go to marginalized communities. So what that does is it creates a social perception saying that these welfare programs are going to people that are marginalized communities. The only way to lift that inequality is our argument is basically lifting that inequality is we have to give that payment to everyone, reduce that stigma. So do you solve for that in any way?
I mean, it's great to reduce stigma, but I think that we should actually maybe provide them with an economic baseline instead of giving the same amount of money to everyone, because stigma is not the number one reason. We don't have a government so we can alleviate stigma.
Oh, we have a government so we can reduce inequality. And so that's our argument, right? But,
Sure.
Okay. That's time. Okay.
Thank you.
I will just So I will be looking at the debate at the framework level to begin with, and then going into our side of the debate, so the affirmative side and then the negative side.
Got it.
If that works with everyone, Judge, are you ready? Okay, are you guys ready? Right. If that works with everyone, then we'll start. Time. Now, Judge, at the end of the day, based on our framework, this debate comes down to who is better able to solve for structural violence to the best of their capabilities. As Winter and Layton explained, structural inequality makes entire groups invisible through moral exclusion, meaning that any system that ignores inequality actively will perpetuate harm. And Memi puts the nail in the coffin. You cannot build a just system based on inequality. We have repeatedly proven that the affirmative is the best side at solving this structural violence. In the current world, which is the neg world, AI is taking jobs and wages have stagnated over the past few years, all of which impact marginalized groups the most. Again, because they only earn about 38 cents for every dollar that other income groups get. Black and Hispanic groups are the most overrepresented in jobs that are most at risk of automation. Brown evidence shows you that AI could increase the racial wealth gap by about $43 billion annually. That impact goes conceded throughout the round. Ultimately, to be better able to help these workers and these groups the most, there's a few key impacts for the AF. The first is increasing economic growth and reducing poverty. You'd be reducing poverty by about 20 to 30% by increasing wages by 10%, saving over 133,000 lives alone in the US every single year. Second is helping democracy stability, which will help to reduce political polarization, have more voter turnout, and reduce the amounts of major policy issues that are blocked by gridlock. These impacts will help health outcomes specifically for marginalized communities. Their directed, targeted spending will keep the social stigma associated with welfare and prevent minorities from ever achieving their full potential under these bad programs. And these are associated with marginalized groups, then those people will always be marginalized and will never be able to achieve their full potential or full equality. Let's go on to funding. They keep telling you that we keep shifting from our funding mechanism. However, I would say that it is not the AF's job to necessarily tell you a specific way to fund a UBI. There are experts in the government to do that for us. I would tell you that it's the affirmative job to tell you very different examples that have worked in the past to fund similar procedures such as a UBI. We provide you various examples, AI taxes, VAT taxes. However, the main one they drop is AI taxes. They never tell you why taxing data centers, AI technology, or other AI automations or innovations will not be able to fund a UBI rather than utilizing taxes like income taxes, which they give you in their $3 trillion number on the general population. It is definitely possible. Land value taxes are also kind of dropped. They just say that it hasn't been done in the past. However, I will tell you there's been several amounts of research done by various experts in various fields that tell you that this is very much possible. On welfare, they say that we can't have both. I misspoke in prospects, that's my fault. However, I would tell you inherently they never tell you why that you can't have both, apart from the fact about money. However, insofar as that we've proved that taxing AI tech is the most likely funding mechanism, the existing money for welfare will continue to flow in. It is not mutually exclusive. Even if you do, I guess, buy their argument that it is mutually exclusive, UBI is not as expensive as they are making you think it is. The Foxman evidence was conceded throughout the UNC. The US would only have to raise about $500 billion more to be able to fund a UBI, not $4 trillion. Then they also tell you that welfare spending is, again, is going to cost the US $3 trillion. However, just look it up, Judge. Judge, it's about $1 trillion, including Medicare and Medicaid. Now, let's go to our case. Starting off on bargaining power, the Parishes and Schiller evidence was conceded throughout the round, which shows that UBI will increase bargaining power and wages because there's a 35% rise in entrepreneurship and redistributing opportunity in these marginalized communities because of a UBI in other countries. Then on political participation, De Silva and McKelvey, both of them tell you that inequality is the reason that voting is being suppressed. However, the loafer evidence is the key part here, which goes conceded, which tells you that UBI has already increased voter turnout in the long term in the Alaska dividend in a study for over 20 years. And finally, the nail in the coffin is the gender inequality argument. The NNEDV finds that in 99% of abuse cases, there is financial control. Hughes and Anzalotti conceded that show that UBI will allow people to leave abusive situations, ultimately reducing the gender inequality as well as gender violence. Let's look at what they tell you in our case. On innovation, they tell you that there's more jobs. On innovation, I would say that more jobs are going to be created through a UBI, and that is not really addressed throughout the UNC. On gender inequality, again, it's not really addressed. They just have this really weird argument saying that it will increase gender inequality, but they never really provide you with a warrant or a reason or any evidence of why. On political participation, I would tell you wage growth will happen. They don't actually tell you why it won't. On inflation, I would say that's also why they can't really contextualize how much inflation increases. I would say that we can do it for them, right? In the 2NC, they conceded. Zeta 11 from the Roosevelt Institute explains that a UBI in the US at most would increase inflation by 0.5 percentage point. Not even enough for the Fed to increase interest rates, as you can see from the Fed's previous 100 decisions. Now, let's go to their case. Upskilling and human ambition have no major impacts. Our evidence say that there would be an increase in wages and productivity, and theirs says there would be a small decline. Let's see. 2 minus 1 is still 1. You're still going to have somewhat productivity. You would still have a net positive. I'd say at the end of the day, people taking less jobs and less work to feed their children is the exact thing we want. We don't want black people in these poor neighborhoods to be working 4 different jobs and working 18-hour shifts to be able to provide for their family. We want them to work 1 job and be able to provide for their family. We want to reform employers and make employers pay people better, improve working conditions, and make people actually want to work. We give the power back to the people, not the companies like in the negative. Direct targeted spending is a terrible counterplan. We need to make sure that people are actually perceived as equal and improve inequality. Perception is incredibly important, which was conceded in the framework. And again, the framework is the main thing in the round that you have to solve for first, before solving for anything else. Thank you. Thus, we affirm.
Thank you.
The affirmative case is a house of cards built on wishful thinking, ignoring the harsh realities of economics, human behavior, and structural inequality. They have pivoted widely from declaring the American dream dead to defending flawed funding mechanisms and now claiming UBI can magically coexist with better alternatives. Recall our core arguments. UBI discourages work, is financially unfeasible, fails to address the root causes of AI displacement, and is outshone by superior alternatives like targeted retraining and wage subsidies. First, the affirmative declares the American dream is dead, positioning UBI as the only way out from complacency. This is emotional rhetoric without substance. The true harm of UBI is a welfare trap, and conditional cash creates a cycle that reduces the incentive to seek jobs or upskill, trapping people in long-term reliance. Behavioral economics, specifically prospect theory, proves that UBI diminishes the marginal utility of extra earnings, as I stated before. Why hustle or take risks when you basics are guaranteed? This lowers labor force participation, stalls innovation, and worsens economic divide, hitting unskilled workers the hardest. Humans are inherently lazy, but under UBI, they are deeply disincentivized. Targeted alternatives like earned income tax credits or wage subsidies revive the workforce without these traps. UBI isn't the only way, it's the wrong way. Also, when asked in the cross-sex on the 2025 KELA report that confirmed this behavioral shift in Finland, where UBI recipients slashed their work hours by 10% when I asked that second affirmative, he said that it's fine. But that is contradictory to the proposed UBI against domestic violence, for example. If those abusers have less time to work, they will spend more time in their homes, hence more domestic violence. And we don't want that. Moving to the affirmative's claim about decoupling GDP from productivity, they argue UBI grants freedom time for productive pursuits. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of human behavior. When AI enhances efficiency, it creates new opportunities, but UBI squanders this transition by diminishing ambition. When labor participation craters, economic vitality slows. People do not automatically use freedom time to reskill for a shifting economy. Instead, adaptation rates plummet. And this brings us to a glaring flaw in the affirmative framework, their absolute failure to address structural violence. The affirmative claims their plan helps marginalized communities and decreases poverty, but giving everyone the exact same income is the worst possible way to mitigate systemic inequality. Structural violence is defined by the unique, disproportionate barriers faced by specific marginalized groups. Distributing a flat, universal check to every single citizen from a displaced minority worker in a red line neighborhood to, for example, I don't know, like a Silicon Valley billionaire, does absolutely nothing to close the wealth gap. It literally maintains the exact same disparities that exist today. It is a blanket solution that willfully ignores the nuances of systemic oppression. True equity requires targeted, proportional assistance based on need, and UBI is not equitable, it is equal. And in an unequal society, treating everyone the same simply preserves structural violence. Now, let's look at their funding mechanisms. They defend VAT taxes so much, claiming they stimulate consumption, and propose AI taxes to fund UBI. This is dangerously naive. A VAT is not a magic bullet. It is a highly regressive consumption tax. It directly raises consumer prices, disproportionately hurting the exact low-income families the affirmative claims to be saving. And taxing AI directly deters innovation from the very firms driving the upsides of automation. Furthermore, the affirmative claims UBI and targeted welfare alternatives could coexist, but their cross-examination admissions expose this fantasy. When asked for a real-world example where UBI successfully coexisted with reskilling programs without resource dilution or incentive conflicts, they admitted there isn't one. Coexistence doesn't exist because you cannot mathematically finance a multi-trillion-dollar UBI alongside superior social programs which we are proposing. It is a fiscal impossibility. They casually state they would not mind a tax hike to fund both, ignoring the devastation that causes that. Massive hikes erode economic benefits, trigger runaway inflation, and burden working families with higher costs, which are the ones that we're trying to protect. Honorable judges, the affirmative recycles economic myths, dodges the mathematical reality of their plan, and clings to unproven coexistence while actively ignoring structural violence. UBI isn't a bridge to the future. It's a detour to dependency, financial strain, and systemic stagnation. It undermines the American dream, marathon of resilience, trading determination for complacency. We must choose targeted alternatives that adapt to AI, empower vulnerable individuals, and actually break down structural barriers. I urge you to vote the negative. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job, everybody. Give me a few minutes.